one note, man. It's a great note. Notes I've used it lots of times. Socket, listen to my musical good taste. Charlie, Socket does one note with good taste. And sorry, Charlie. Woodpeck seems to get to be targeted. Woodpeck seems 100% solid white color today. Like spring water. It's the case.
Hello everyone, we are back from the north. I know it's been a really long time since we were last talking to you guys here on the show. Unfortunately, as we keep saying, we are not yet paid by the CIA, although we're open to it. But until then, things, our jobs, school gets in the way, and we have been unable to have a weekly chat as we would like. However, there's been a crisis this whole year, really, but it has gotten way worse over the last month that it was very important for Edu and I to talk about. So how are you, Edu? What have you been up to for however many months?
I'm pretty good. I've been dealing with life, dealing with school, dealing with work. It's been tough, but here we are for this very special episode. Hopefully, we can get back on track soon enough.
Right.
And
Once again,
yeah,
AOC's stupidity got us back on this podcast.
it's funny how like most of our conversations on WhatsApp is just talking about people saying stupid stuff on Twitter, and especially
Oh, that's so,
AOC.
well, but mostly, like, I'm always the one messaging you just links that piss me off, so I don't go, like, talk shit on Twitter. So instead, I tell Edu, like, I hate this person, like, why? And then he
And that's
talks
the
me off the
smart thing
ledge.
to do. That is the smart thing to do. For everyone watching and listening, if you see something stupid on Twitter, do not engage. Just send it to your friend group and complain with them. That's more healthy.
Right. Unless
Um,
it's an issue that is so important, like what we're going to talk about today, no?
mm-hmm. And it's something that we talked about before. It's just unfortunately a situation that has not improved, and if anything, it has gotten way worse. And there are new developments that are not necessarily for the better of the people involved. So you, Hermione, you live in the city of New York. Hopefully, I'm not doxing you. It's one of the biggest cities in the world. So go find out where Hermione lives. I'll give you $1,000 on Kindle to do that.
Or not, please. Anyway.
So now that you're there and you've seen what's happening firsthand, can you tell the audience what is it that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so as you guys know, I work as a reporter, and I've been particularly covering the immigration beat in New York because over the summer, I mean, this has really been happening for a year now, but over the summer, the situation really, really got much worse. Probably you guys watching this show are aware of the crisis in Venezuela that has sparked a refugee crisis. Well, those numbers, a high number of Venezuelans started crossing the U.S.-Mexico border in recent years. It's mostly Venezuelans, but of course, there are the people from the other dictatorships in the region. There are a lot of Cubans, a lot of Nicaraguas, and also just people from other authoritarian regimes, like the one in
Or
Honduras.
regimes, or countries that are just doing poorly.
Correct. But actually, it's important to say, Edu, the majority of the biggest portion of the migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border are running from 21st century socialism. The biggest portion
they are.
is Venezuelans by large, but then followed, of course, actually, how crazy, there's more Venezuelans crossing than Central Americans and Mexicans. I mean, just that
And
fact should tell you.
And Venezuelans have to go through dense jungle in order to
The
get there.
Darien
And,
Gap corrects.
yeah,
So they are
it's
walking,
a testament.
basically.
Yeah, they're walking through a jungle in order to get to the U.S. to seek shelter, and that's just a testament of how bad things are back home in Venezuela. Like in Cuba, people risk their lives. They go on that makeshift boat, try to make it to Florida. Venezuelans are crossing a dense tropical jungle full of people, criminal organizations that will kidnap people, or we just are involved in drug trafficking, or what
Human
have
traffickers. I mean, it's horrific. But you know, Edu, what I have found interesting when I talked to the migrants who came from the Darien Gap, and I asked them like the worst part, they say it was waiting in countries like Mexico and Honduras because of the violent groups that are always around, like hunting you as you just wait to cross.
Yeah, and they have to get help from coyote groups, which are also not particularly very good, in order to like get across. And these people are paying thousands of dollars to get into a human trafficking. It's just like horrible, horrible situation that they're going through. But still, for many people, for the hundreds of thousands of people that are getting into the United States from these countries, it's worth it, because it's so much better, the opportunity that they would get getting into the United States as what they're facing back home, right? And
Right. And I
we
mean,
say it a lot. We say it a lot, but we cannot stress this enough. The things in these countries are not only bad, but they just constantly keep getting worse.
right. And I mean, we have talked a lot in this show about the reasons that made these migrants leave Venezuela. But now, of course, they are once again being used as political pawns once they reach the US by both sides. So what's been happening, I'm sure you guys know, the governor of Texas, the governor of Florida has done this as well. They have been busing migrants, mostly Venezuelans, to progressive cities like New York and Chicago over the last year. These cities have a right to shelter law, which means that anybody who says, I have nowhere to stay, I need somewhere to stay, the city must provide one. Of course, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, did this to fight what he says are the Democrats' open arms immigration policies. Now, I think it's a terrible thing to do, to use humans this way. However, what has ended up happening, Edu, is that the Texas governor was proven right. The mayor of New York City, the governor of New York City are now moving to end a right to shelter law because the city is completely overwhelmed by migrants. And I say this as someone who's pro-immigration, as someone who understands these are people who truly have an asylum claim. New York City can no longer control the situation. We're talking about nearly 100,000 people who have arrived in just 1 year. That's 60,000 people currently under the city's care. So what the city has had to do is turn iconic hotels like the Roosevelt Hotel has now become an intake center for migrants. Now, this is something that Americans can see happening every day. They can see it in the news, what's happening in Eagle Pass, Texas. I mean, over the last week, the scenes are horrific. Particularly, I mean, for us Venezuelans, Edu, I saw an image of Venezuelans with a flag and then just like dropping to their knees and hugging each other as soon as they manage to cross the river. And how can I not be heartbroken by that? I mean, it goes to show, I told a story on Twitter. I was out at the Roosevelt registering center talking to Venezuelans, and I asked one of them in Spanish, like, how did you get here? Knowing what his answer was going to be. I know all of the newly arrived migrants in New York come from Texas. And he told me something like, not like you, I bet you came in a plane. You know, he knew I was Venezuelan. And he's right. I came 17 years ago, and the situation has only gotten worse. The first ones, like me, we left on a plane, and now they're walking here. But Edu, everyone talks about how the right uses migrants, but really what inspired us was, once again, it's on both sides, you know. The right is using the migrants as they always do, but the left is also doing their thing. Of course, our most critiqued probably Congress member in this podcast, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is a congresswoman from New York, and she has to address the crisis. So how does she address it? How her ideology dictates and blames it on U.S. sanctions. Your turn, Edu. Take it away.
Should we talk about the sanctions? Because I just had this discussion with I don't know if it was a real person or a bot in the internet, but I still, I was doing nothing better, so I managed to engage. Someone was defending AOC's position, and AOC's position on this whole issue is that the migrant crisis is caused by U.S. Sanctions on Venezuela. To be fair, she
And
does,
what the U.S.
you know,
government
in
should do
introduce- she
to
does
help is what she's saying, what she's asking the
Remove
U.S. government
sanctions.
to do is remove sanctions, not anything immigration related. Even though she is supposedly a progressive. Sorry, go on.
Yes, that's okay. To be fair, she does like when pressed about it, she does say like, "Oh no, I don't like directly support the Maduro government, but this is an issue of U.S. sanctions that is causing the Venezuelan crisis in the first place," which is really bullshit because when you're really, I get it that from a perspective of someone who's from the U.S. who has no contact with what's happening in Venezuela, that makes sense, right? Oh, our country is the most powerful country in the world. They're sanctioning a smaller country. There's an economic crisis. Therefore, there's a migrant crisis. But the reality of this is, well, sanctions, wide-scale sanctions on Venezuela really only started in 2019. And we're seeing this migrant crisis not in the U.S. but in Latin America particularly. We've been seeing this since 2013, 2014. Heck, I left the country in 2017, and there were already like 5 million Venezuelans out of the country. There's 8 million Venezuelans out of the country now. And any sanctions that would like came before that, and a lot of pundits like to use this, well, Venezuela has been sanctioned since 2011, 2013, 2014, whatever. All of these sanctions were individual sanctions against people in the regime that were committing crimes against humanity in Venezuela. So individual sanctions shouldn't cause a major economic downfall like what we've seen in Venezuela. But what has happened is that since 2019, since back then it was the Trump administration who placed this like wide sanctions on Venezuela and on oil and on business with Venezuela. What we've seen in Venezuela is that because these remember that Venezuela is a kleptocracy, so it's controlled by a few people in the party and people in the military. These people would, all the money that they're getting from the oil and the cocaine business, they would spend it abroad. They would buy properties in the US, Canada, Europe, all over the world, invest in businesses abroad, and that will be the way to keep their funds safe. Ever since the sanctions, however, they were forced to start investing money in the country, because that's, if you cannot invest abroad, the only way to launder your money is to do it locally. And what that has caused in Venezuela, which is crazy to think because you don't usually think sanctions could have a positive effect, but in fact it has had a positive effect somewhat, in the sense that the Maduro government was forced to turn 180 degrees on its socialist policy, state-controlled economy, and shift towards a more liberalized economy, private business economy. Obviously, a big portion of these businesses are of people that are in the regime, but that money that they're putting into the economy with jobs, with employment, inevitably trickles down into normal people. And there are other people that have to do absolutely nothing with the regime that have been able, because of this liberalization of the economy, being able to access foreign currency. Remember, the bolivar is it's the Venezuelan currency. It's worthless. They have been able to start their own businesses and do business with the people who are currently in the regime. So Venezuela today is a very different country compared to what it was back in 2017.
The bottom line is Venezuela became a hot topic like when people couldn't find toilet paper, when people were actually on their way of starving to death, and this was before sanctions in the oil industry. And the situation is no longer the same in Venezuela. I mean, you have malnutrition, you still have hunger, but that
still have poverty.
Situation. Sorry?
You still have poverty, but yeah, like you're probably gonna say,
but
the situation
you can
different.
find food. Before sanctions, like there were people who could not find food. Like even if they had money to buy it, there was just no food around, like North Korea style. But it would be one thing if Venezuelans hadn't repeatedly told progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, If this was the first time we were going through this, it would be worth explaining the timeline of the sanctions. But they have heard this. I don't think it's a matter of that they really believe sanctions are to blame. I think it's as simple as they're politicians and they're doing the same thing that Republicans do, looking at an issue and saying, what can I say and what can't I say to protect my ideology and myself? That's what I think is happening. I don't think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to see the timeline, this is when sanctions happened, and change her mind.
I don't think she even cares. I don't think they care in the left wing side of the Democratic Party. Obviously, they have a very important vote base that it's hardcore 90s style communist, socialist, left wing people that in their mind is just whatever the U.S. does, we are completely against that, right?
But that's what they are
in foreign policy. Yeah,
that's what they are. Yet we still have young people saying they're not that leftist, they're not that extreme, they're not a threat. And I'm like, Bernie Sanders was a presidential candidate. I'm allowed to talk about his views as a threat.
I think it's because they don't care. Because it doesn't affect them directly, right? They like, care about...
Every time I talk about this, they'll tweet like, but Donald Trump was president. I guess, yeah, Bernie Sanders didn't make it to president, but I'm damn sure gonna make sure nobody like him does. You know what I mean? Like, are we only allowed to talk about the problems once they have happened?
And that's the thing. It's a very important thing to talk. Like, it matters and it boils our blood because we understand the situation back home and we have a good understanding of what's happening across the globe. So we care about foreign policy decisions. But unfortunately, that is not the case for what my perception is of the white American public. Foreign policy is not the things that they most care about. So if they can have a little ignorance and just if you're a left wing, you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, sure, but Venezuela it's doing bad because of sanctions. That makes sense.
It's how they look. I mean, the right is looking at the issue and saying, how do we blame immigrants? And the left is looking at the issue and saying, how do I blame the U.S.? I saw a really interesting meme today that was like, holy shit, Bernie Sanders can find more positive things to say about Cuba and Russia than he can about the U.S. And that's the case. Like, every time they ask Bernie Sanders to denounce communism, he's like, well, am I not supposed to say how great Cuba is in education? But like, they do not give the same treatment to the U.S. I mean, it's just enraging to me.
It is. It absolutely is. And I guess this is where we come into play. This is why we like discussing these things, because these are the things that get under the table in the big picture for U.S. policy. And also there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, like for me, like I don't even live in the US. Why do I care about these things? Well, unfortunately, like we've said many times before in this show, you have to care about what the US is doing, especially in foreign policy, because they are still the big global superpower and they have the power to lean things one way or the other. And the least that we want to see, us as Venezuelans, is a normalization of relationships with the Maduro government, that we let them do whatever they're trying to do.
Which, by the way, talking about sanctions, like, who has financed the Chavista regime? The U.S., and they're about to do it again because they're desperate for oil. So don't you worry, the sanctions will be removed, AOC, and the crisis will continue. Then what?
Not only the crisis will continue, but the Venezuelan government is going to see itself in a more stronger position, not only geopolitically, with not necessarily a friendship with the United States, but a normalization of the economic ties that it has, Venezuela, with the U.S. But also, like I said before, the Venezuelan government was only forced into this liberalization of the economy because they couldn't invest abroad due to the sanctions. What's going to happen when the sanctions are lifted? That system I feel that system is not going to be needed anymore, and they can go back to what Venezuela was in 2016 and 2017, a state-controlled economy where only a few, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people,
by the U.S. buying oil.
financed by the U.S. buying oil can invest in their houses in Beverly Hills, in New York,
This
in
is what
Europe,
enrages
and
me,
everywhere
Ew,
across the
because
world.
to me, these people act like they're cool progressives. To me, what is the progressive view? Actually, the US is to blame in a big part for what's going on in Venezuela for one, financing them, continuing to buy their oil far after we knew this was turning into a dictatorship. And now they're gonna do it again because it's US first. They're at war in Ukraine, issues with Russia, they're gonna go and buy Venezuelan oil again. And they never really stopped. I mean, can we talk about the extensions that Chevron has received? The US, if we want to talk about the US being the bad guy, it has been a bad guy by not caring about the human rights of Venezuelans in exchange for Venezuelan oil. That's what has happened. That's how the US is to blame for the migrants who are arriving at the border.
And now that they have the issue knocking at the door with the migrants, what we're seeing is, well, Venezuelans, migrants, very vulnerable migrants, and again, not only from Venezuela but also Nicaragua, Cuba, and Central America, are being politicized instead of being helped. The United States is a big ass country with a very low population density. It's a country that has enough resources and space to help these people. Yet, what's happening? These people are just being put in buses, travel all the way the country, all the way up north to democratic sanctuaries that simply don't have the capacity to deal with these people.
And I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you.
I want to.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say that I want to take it further with the situation further up north with Canada. Many of these people were using the U.S. to get through Canada, and in March, silently, the Canadian government closed its borders to asylum seekers, such as the one that were coming from Central America, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. So the situation has only gotten worse in the U.S., and the Canadian government has not gotten any bad rep or publicity about what they're doing. A country that is supposed to be a safe haven for refugees. A country
that's very. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, in March they closed the border, and the people that were coming through New York to Quebec, for example, which is by far the most popular border crossing, are not able to do so anymore. They cannot just cross the border and seek asylum in Canada. They're being sent back to the United States. So it's a matter of what they say about the Canadian government, which is a very progressive or self-proclaimed progressive government. The Democrats themselves,
right,
claim to be very progressive, and they're also trying to find a way to stop refugees from coming to.
As a way to fix this would be, or help the situation, would be for Canada and the US to work together to get more migrants to Canada in an organized way to the regions where they're better off finding jobs, etc. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, I've talked to the Venezuelan migrants in New York, and they have to, it's no longer than in Texas they put them in a bus and they don't know where they're going. No, they want to now go to New York. And why wouldn't they? If they're starting a new life in a new country and they're gonna get put in a shelter while they figure their stuff out. A big issue is that they didn't have work permits while asking for asylum. Now we have to talk about this. The Biden administration has finally given TPS to Venezuelans and work permits. That's something that's going to help the situation. With Mayor Eric Adams kept saying, you're bringing all these people and they can't work. That's going to end up in a bad situation. You have thousands of migrants coming to New York every week and they're not allowed to work, but they're not in the country illegally. That's another misconception. They are awaiting their asylum claim to be heard. So they are not here legally, but they can't work legally. How does that work?
And that's the issue. That's the issue that you have with irregular migration, and by that I mean refugee and asylum seekers all over the world, not only in North America, but in Latin America and in Europe and all across the globe. If you don't give these people the right to work, the ability to work, to formalize what they're doing and pay taxes into the economy, of course they're going to be a burden to your economy. These are people that are dying to have the opportunity to work and put. I know this is kind of like a cliche thing, and a lot of left-wing people hate saying this, but put their bootstraps on and just go ahead and work. But if you don't do that, you're just gonna have to invest in them, give them shelter, give them food, give them all the things that they need, and that's just gonna
Which
come
is
out of
what's happening in
taxpayers'
New
pocket.
York now. It's
Thankfully,
just
the Biden
it's
administration has approved the TPS, which is a good thing. It's a good step in the right direction, but I don't feel it's enough. They're not doing enough to really look at what is the main issue that's causing all of this people to come to the United States in the first place.
right. So that's my attack against the U.S. Oh, you want to buy oil again, and we know you're gonna do it. Then accept the migrants that your dirty business is creating. Accept them and build infrastructure for them. Work with Mexico and Canada to address the biggest refugee crisis this side of our hemisphere has seen. I mean, I always repeat that because why is the entire world not aware of what's going on here? Because when the Syria crisis was happening, we were aware here that there was a problem. But again, like everything with the Venezuela issue and 21st century socialism, it doesn't get the same treatment. But the people are there, the millions are displaced, and they're showing up at the door of Americans, and it's not their fault, and they're gonna keep coming.
So I want to ask you a question. Now that like you've been there, you've seen this with your own eyes, and you've been doing your journalist job with these migrants. What are the things that these people are saying? What are the things that the migrants themselves are feeling?
Right. So I did want to talk about that, Ew, because I don't know how to lie. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've seen a lot of bad scenes outside the Roosevelt Hotel, which I think have happened because again, these people have nothing to do. So they're just loitering outside all day, and that's how I've talked to them. The ones that I have talked to are very young Venezuelan men, all under 25 years old. As in, they have never lived in democracy. All they know is Chavismo. When I ask them what they're fleeing, I mean, I'm sure you won't be surprised that none of them have said sanctions. As a matter of fact, I was surprised that they don't cite hunger. One of them explicitly told me it's not even the hunger. It's the lack of opportunity, and it's the fact a lot of them mention the police. All of them, actually. They talk about the police harassing you, that you can't have a business or make money in any way without a corrupt politician or police person or city official showing up and demanding all you have. There's just no way up. It's not the situation, as we said, before sanctions, where people were actually starving to death and the country was on its way to a massive starvation crisis. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, I just can't do anything without a corrupt official fucking up my life.
So like you have it firsthand what the people are feeling. Like who the only people in Venezuela that are blaming the sanctions for what's going on is the people in the government. So when people outside of Venezuela take this line, they're effectively taking the line of the regime, not the line of the actual victims, the people that are going
1,000%. And I'm not gonna lie, again, all these people aren't saying I'm fleeing Chavismo. They don't say that. They're young guys who don't really know much about politics, and they'll tell you it's not even about the politics. It's about the lack of opportunity, basically. Like it's not that they told me what I would have wanted to hear, a speech against Chavismo and all of that. No, it's young men who want to have a job and be able to keep their money, period.
But that also speaks to another issue of Venezuela specifically. Now, focusing on Venezuela, is that we've been through this dictatorship for so long. It's been 25 years since Chavismo took power that we just don't know anything else. Like you said, these guys are 25 years old or younger, so their whole life they're lived through a dictatorship. So in Venezuela, there is no sentiment of that things could change, or that things could be better, or that there could be a political change in the country that could, positively affect everyone's life. It's just they've given up the hope that something better could happen back home. Yeah. And to be fair, that's what most Venezuelans feel. That's what I feel. And it's now up to the countries that are receiving this thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of migrants for them to be given the opportunity to have a better life, because it's just impossible to have back home.
Right. And something also that I must share, and it speaks to issues about how a whole country was lost and how the new generation hasn't been properly educated because they have already been indoctrinated into Chavismo. The migrants who are arriving now are the very, very most desperate. These are people who did not have much money in Venezuela. Again, they are forced to walk to the United States. And several of them would say that Chavez wasn't the problem, that it was Maduro.
But like that's I think that's the unfortunate fact of history, is that while Chavez was the one who dismantled democracy in the country, and which was very evident to the people that were paying attention, for the vast majority of Venezuelans who were not really paying attention to what's happening politically, what they seen is that they had a country with a government that had oil, and although they stole most of the revenue that they were getting from oil, they were investing some of that money into improving people's life, especially poor people. So when oil prices...
In very insignificant ways, like giving them a fridge. I mean, it wasn't like...
Giving them a fridge, but like also they have like their missions, like they have like education for like older people and what have you, which, yeah, like at the end of the day, it did, serve for the benefit of a lot of people. The thing is that while they were doing that, they were dismantling democracy. So when oil prices went down, which
I disagree with that. It's like... Yeah, they were. It's like when people praise Cuban education. Yeah, but they're teaching them to read by saying Fidel is the best one in the world. That was the same with the education and medicine in Venezuela.
But here's the thing: like, people don't care about that. People care about be given the opportunity to be educated.
Yeah.
Of having a house, a free house by the government that's probably not well built. Sure, but they're giving a house. And these things were able to happen because the oil barrel was astronomically high before 2013.
Again, U.S. funding that corruption and the establishment of a dictatorship. Can someone tell this to AOC? I have found her argument against the U.S. in this issue.
They don't care because it's not the thing that they're going to talk about to their constituents. You know what I mean? Like, they only care about the headline. Oh, U.S. bad, U.S. sanction in Venezuela.
I do want to say...
because of Venezuelans.
I want to say before the Democratic fans come at me, the official line of the Democratic Party is not AOC's. They do say Maduro's a dictator, the sanctions are appropriate, even though they're about to remove them and haven't really deployed them the appropriate way. But Senator Dick Durbin said today, clearly in response to AOC getting slammed, that he spoke to a group of Venezuelan refugees today and he understood that what they are fleeing is a dictatorship and not U.S. sanctions. So I thought that gave me a little, once again, a calming feeling like, okay, the adults are still in charge. I don't know for how much longer, because if you see the polls, we have to talk about that next. The polls are not looking good for Joe Biden. But yeah, Senator Durbin's statement at least made me think the adults are still in charge.
In the Democratic Party, for sure, the main line of the Democratic Party is still very moderate, thank to God. Very center right, center left, depends on who you ask, type of policies domestically and abroad. But yeah, like you said, polls are not looking good for the Biden administration. Surprisingly, a guy that's being persecuted for several different crimes, borderline treason, it's polling ahead of Joe Biden. Obviously, we're speaking of Donald Trump, the probably the second guy that we like to bash the most in this show after AOC. And yeah, God knows what's gonna happen in 2024. He
reminds me of Chavez so much. There was a tweet that I was like, this is Chavez. When he got indicted the third time, he tweeted, I'm one indictment away from securing the election. And I'm like, this motherfucker, like, he's so
Is he
good at
wrong?
populism.
Is he
And
wrong though?
Exactly. It's like, that tweet was, like, could have been written by Chavez.
It could have, and you know what? It's probably true. He's probably gonna get elected again. Well, there's still a long way to go to get to that point, but it speaks to the level that U.S. democracy is at the moment. You introduced right-wing populism in 2016, and it doesn't seem to be a way out of it.
That's right. It's definitely scary times, and we'll continue talking about this. Especially, I mean, for us, this is so painful to see Venezuelan migrants just desperately reaching the U.S. Every day. But to close off, can we talk about two? Well, let's just do one story, because Canada has been in the news more often than not, and
I want to talk about both though. Both are funny.
I know we're so inappropriate, but okay, can we start by how does a Nazi end up being honored in the Canadian Parliament in front of Zelensky?
I don't know. So apparently what happened, just for people to be aware, is that they invited a Ukrainian a veteran of World War II. This guy was like 100 years old, to be at the parliament and be honored by the members of parliament. The thing is that they seemed like they didn't put two and two together, because if you think about Ukrainian vets that are 100 years old, that were alive
and fought Russia,
that were alive in World War II, and they were fighting the Russians. Who were they fighting for then? So it turns out that the guy was essentially a Nazi. He was fighting for the
That's
Waffe
what cracked me up. Because when they were honoring them, they said, this guy is Ukrainian and he fought the Russians and he's a World War II veteran. So I'm like,
no one raised an eyebrow. Like, no one did their homework. Like, no one was like, hey, something doesn't add up here. So what ended up happening is that immediately after that happened, people did some research. It's like, oh, this guy fought for the Nazis. He's an actual Nazi. Not like when people say, oh,
And,
this
like,
guy's
had
a Nazi or
bragged
that
about
other guy's a Nazi. No, this
Like,
guy
he
was
had
a Nazi.
in a blog he wrote the best years of his life were from like 1944 to 41 till 44. So,
Oh, I wonder why. I wonder what's happening in Ukraine between 1941 and 1944. But yeah, so the fallout from that has been that the speaker of parliament in Canada has resigned. He resigned today, and you know what, that makes sense. But it's fucking funny. It's funny. It's a funny story.
It's hilarious. But it has this blunder that should have never happened, does have repercussions, because Russian officials took it immediately, because Zelensky was there, to repeat their claim that they invaded Ukraine to fight the Nazis. So they took that and ran. Like, I mean, it was like Christmas for them. So that's the problem of being a democratic nation.
You know what? Like people, like, I would like to believe that people are in government, they have they're very experienced and they do their homework and they think before they act, but they just serve to prove that it's not really like that. So yeah, Canada just have a Nazi notable. The second thing that happened in Canada, which is way more messed up and it has way more geopolitical ramifications, is that a Sikh leader. So for those of you who don't know, Sikh is the denomination, is a religion in some parts of India, and they back home in India they don't have a good relationship with the nationalist Hindu government. So a Sikh leader that was Canadian, he was living in Canada, was assassinated in Canada. And Canada, through its partnership with the intelligence service of the UK, of the US, and other allies, determined that he was in fact assassinated in part due to the influence of Indian government officials and diplomats in Canada, which is very fucked up. It's an invasion of sovereignty, and like Justin Trudeau rightly said so, we can't allow foreign governments to be killing our own citizens in our own soil. And India obviously denies it, and as a response, they have called their. I think they're asking for visas now, or they shut down their visa process for Canadians going to India. Which wow, ouch, I guess. But it's very messed up, and it speaks to. Immediately when I saw this, I was thinking of BRICS, of this new economic alliance that it's happening to combat the U.S. dominated global order, which it's head-speared by Brazil, by Russia, by India, by South Africa, and by am I missing anyone? China, obviously. So I guess that's where we're at now. We have people in Canada being killed, Canadians being killed by foreign governments.
What did we say when Khashoggi was killed in Turkey? This isn't the end of that. This sends a message to others. And now they did it in Canada.
And now it's happening in Canada. Canada, it's supposed to be, this perfect integration diplomatic country. It's being victim of this.
Imagine if Canada did that in India. What would AOC be saying? If the US went and did that in India? What would Bernie Sanders be saying? But what's most concerning to me is I didn't hear, I'm someone who's reading the news all the time, and I didn't hear about this until someone told me several days after. So this has not really been picked up in the US news as I think it should be. I mean, to me, this is a top story, but once again, as you said about Americans and foreign policy, they just don't care. But this is severe.
It is pretty bad. It's an invasion of sovereignty, and it's not the first time that something like this has happened. Remember, Iran trying to kidnap a U.S. citizen through Venezuela to send her back to Iran. We've talked about this many times before in the show. But it
these guys feel like they can do it now. They feel like it's okay to do it, and they have gotten away with it.
And they probably will get away with it.
Where is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia today? Still meeting with all the most important world leaders, even though they murdered Khashoggi, a U.S. citizen, in Turkey. I'm getting pissed about it all over again. But anyway.
It's what it is. It is the world we're living.
It is the world we're living in. And as we have been warning you guys, these authoritarians are just gaining ground. And meanwhile, we're still not paid by the CIA. So again, if you can reach out to them, let them know we're here doing the Lord's work. George Soros would love us as well. They're all welcome.
And obviously, make sure the way that you can help us get through that is make sure to subscribe, to give a like, to share with people that cares about these things. Hopefully there are still people who care about the things that we're talking about, because if not, the world is pretty much doomed. So anyway, thank you guys. It's been a minute since we've done an episode. We hopefully it's not gonna be a long time before we do another one. We don't have we don't have time frame. We don't know.
Oh my god! And
doing.
I want to say, I don't know if you've had it, but I've had several people reach out to me asking where it's from the north, and we miss it, and that means the world.
Me too. It means the world to me. Sometimes I think I'm just speaking into the air, but when I actually have people coming to me and saying hey, how come you haven't posted a new episode in a minute? It's the show over? It's never over. We're always pissed off, and we'll always have something to talk about.
That's right.
We just have life to deal with.
Bueno, thank you guys for joining us again, and we'll see you soon.
Take it easy, guys. Bye.